Hello, this is Katrina from Unity of New Orleans. Welcome to our Sunday Satsang. Satsang means to be in the company of truth, and we are so happy that you joined us. We will be honoring the Father for Father's Day. So let us begin with our invocation written by Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore. We are now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. We acknowledge thy presence and thy power, O blessed Spirit. In thy divine wisdom, now erase our mortal limitations, and from thy pure substance of love, bring into manifestation our world according to thy perfect law. And the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Well, happy Father's Day. And we are honoring fathers, our earthly fathers, the Father of Unity, Charles Fillmore, and the Father's love, or anyone who has represented a father figure in your life. So no matter what your relationship with your earthly father is, this message is for everyone. And remember, of course, in Unity, the Father represents the divine masculine aspect of God, or the Source. And that aspect is present within all of us as wisdom, understanding, and the illumination of consciousness. So I'd like to look at the daily word first. This is for Sunday, June 20th, 2021, and it is about the Father's love. The affirmation is, I give thanks for the Father and all expressions of fatherly love. And it says, I treasure childhood memories of perhaps feeling safe when my father or a father figure was nearby, remembering my father's encouragement in learning to ride a bike or exploring the wonders of nature, maybe making youthful mistakes. And there was the Father's wise judgment that helped me to find the way. I give thanks for both the sacred human and the unfolding expression of God within my Father and everyone who has blessed me with fatherly love. Today I pray for my Father and for all fathers, affirming for each of them growing wisdom, understanding, and a willingness to nurture others with a Father's encouraging love. And the scripture comes from John 15:9, which reads, As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. So my dad was a young father who was still working on his education when I was a kid. And since he was busy being a student, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. So I remember my granddad well, and I was really quite blessed to have such grandparents. You see, my grandmother was involved in the theater and the arts, and she was a professional vocalist and an actress. And my grandfather, he played trumpet, he did sound engineering, he did all of her producing for theater. I mean, they were so amazing. So growing up with these grandparents, every storybook that they gave me came with a record. So each story had its own soundtrack. And so I loved story time with my grandfather. I remember he would sit down in his big chair So I want you to visualize your grandfather or your father or a father figure sitting down in his big chair to read you a story through which he would disseminate wisdom and understanding and illumination. And from this big chair that my grandfather used to sit in, I'm going to read you a story about Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore. Now, Charles Fillmore was not one to take things on blind faith. He had an inquiring scientific mind. And when he saw the healings that were coming as a result of his wife's prayers, remember, Myrtle had been diagnosed with tuberculosis and given 6 months to live, and she began to pray. And with her conviction and the affirmation that she was a child of God and therefore she did not inherit sickness, she was healed fully and went on to live another 45 years. So this is in the 1880s. And Charles was watching this happen, and he began to question why. And then he saw that Myrtle was helping other people being healed, and there must be a reason for these healings. So he commenced to inquire into this reason. He read all the books that he could find on the subject, and wherever there were courses available, he took them. Both Myrtle and Charles studied with a metaphysician, Joseph Adams, who published this journal called The Truth Gleaner in Chicago, which was a metaphysical journal. And they also traveled to Chicago to study with Emma Curtis Hopkins, which Emma Curtis was an American spiritual teacher and leader, and she was very much involved in organizing the New Thought movement as a primary theologian, teacher, writer, feminist, mystic, and healer. She was a very dynamic woman, probably the major influence in the Fillmores' lives. So at first, Mr. Fillmore was disturbed by all of these conflicting statements about truth that were made by the various teachers that he was studying with. And he just couldn't understand why there was so much division amongst the schools and such an assortment of opinions about what he thought should be an exact science. So Charles wrote, "The muddle was so deep that for a time I was inclined to ridicule. Yet I couldn't get away from the evidence of a great power behind the flood of contradictory statements." So there might have been some doubt as to which one of the teachers was right, but as to the results, there could be no doubt whatsoever. For you see, Charles Fillmore could see the results with his own eyes, and about that doubt that he was experiencing, he wrote, "I noticed, however, that all the teachers and writers talked a great deal about the omnipresent, omniscient God who is spirit and is accessible to everyone. I said to myself, in this babble, I will go to headquarters. If I am spirit, and this God they talk so much about is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud." I then commenced to sitting in the silence every night at a certain hour and tried to get in touch with God. There was no enthusiasm about it, no soul desire, but a cold, calculating business method. I was there on time every night and tried in all conceivable ways to realize that my mind was in touch with the Supreme Mind. In this cold, intellectual attitude, one can easily understand why I did not seem to get any conscious result. But I kept at it month after month, mentally affirming words that others told me would open the way, until it got to be a habit. And then I rather enjoyed it. However, a time came when I began to observe that I was having exceedingly idealistic dreams. For months, I paid no attention to them. My business at that time was buying and selling real estate. The first connection that I observed between the dreams and my affairs was after closing the purchase of a piece of property. I remembered that I had dreamed about the whole transaction some months before. After that, I watched my dreams closely and found that there was a wider intelligence manifesting in my sleep than I seemed to possess in the waking state. And it flashed over me one day that this was the mode of communication that had been established in response to my interest, my desire for information from headquarters. This has been kept up ever since, with a growing interest on my part, and I could fill a large book with my experiences. Everything which is necessary for me to know is shown to me, and I have times without number been saved from false steps by this monitor. Again and again I have mapped out the future along certain lines for months and years ahead, and the prophecies so far never failed, although I have sometimes misinterpreted the symbols which were used. So this is the way in which Charles Fillmore came into truth. See, he was a practical man, and he sought for something that was an exact science. And being a student, he studied under many teachers. And in the end, he turned to the one true source, as all who seek truth must do. For Mr. Fillmore was not a halfway sort of person. Once he became convicted that he was on the track of truth, he threw all his mind and energies into that pursuit. And although he did not immediately discontinue his interest in real estate and mining, his absorption in spiritual matters became greater and greater. He wrote, "My interest became so pronounced that I neglected my real estate for the furtherance of what my commercial friends denounced as a fanatical delusion." I can only imagine. But you see, what was happening at this time was that Charles Fillmore was taking the most important step of his life. He was struggling with his income and had been for years because there was a depression sweeping Kansas City following the collapse of a real estate boom. And the needs of his family were greater than they had ever been, for he had just had a third child, Royal, who was born that year. And he had no formal schooling, nor did he have any experience whatsoever in publishing. However, he decided to publish a magazine. He had something which he could say without reservation, and this was his conviction. This is truth. This was something that he could believe in and live by. And while a timid man might have held back, Charles Fillmore had the courage to follow that conviction, for he had a faith and he had demonstration of why and how these principles work in people all around him. So he dared to step out on that faith. And having found something that he felt was worth saying, he decided to say it. In April of 1889, he printed the first issue of the magazine that he called Modern Thought. It contained 16 pages, and underneath the name of the magazine appeared the motto, quote, "Devoted to the spiritualization of humanity from an independent standpoint," end quote. The price was 10 cents an issue, $1 for a year's subscription. And in the first article, Mr. Fillmore wrote, "The wave of spiritual thought that is sweeping over the land has created a demand in this vicinity for a publication devoted to its discussion and dissemination. With this object in view, Modern Thought magazine had its birth. This magazine is not the organ of any school of thought, but the mouthpiece of all honest souls, earnestly seeking for spiritual light." What we see in this story is that Charles Fillmore was demonstrating the principle of communing with the Father, the divine masculine aspect of Source, illumination of consciousness, wisdom. And he did that by sitting in the silence every day. And he experienced the Father's love through these divine ideas that came through in his dreams, receiving these answers, this inspiration and information from the Source. And because of that manifestation of the Father's love, he had the courage to start a spiritual magazine in 1889. And that's how Unity was born. And now Unity is all over the world. It's the largest New Thought organization. And we are so grateful for Charles Fillmore, the father of Unity. So let us give thanks for the Father and all expressions of fatherly love. Now, you know, in Unity, we are metaphysicians, and so we do not take anything literally. We seek to find a deeper wisdom in these principles, and so we do not teach that God is an anthropomorphic figure who resides in heaven, because we have a more scientific understanding, and God, or the Source, must be principle. So let us turn to the revealing word to read Mr. Fillmore's definition of the Father. He calls him the Father Mind, is the living principle, the absolute, the great unlimited. The Father principle is the exact and immutable principle of being, lying behind all of existence as cause, approachable only along lines of perfect law. It is omnipresent and not subject to change. So then Mr. Fillmore went on to explain in his writings that God is principle, law, being, mind, spirit, all good, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal, Creator, Father, and the source of all that is. And Mr. Fillmore said, God is individually formed in consciousness in each of us and is known to us as Father. Thus, through our consciousness, we access God. And in Unity speak, God is divine mind and you are the divine idea. So you were seeded from the source. Everything begins in consciousness. And as Charles demonstrated in our story, when we commune with the Father, the divine consciousness, divine mind, the source, we can receive information, divine ideas that come through our own higher consciousness. And as he demonstrated so often, he truly believed that everything begins in consciousness. So let's unpack this principle of consciousness a little bit. And of course, we've got to go to the most ancient source that speaks about this principle, which is the Bhagavad Gita, which may be some 8,000 years old. So the Gita explains that consciousness refers to the Atman, which is your soul or your true self. And in fact, the presence of the soul is known by its symptom, which is called consciousness. So I love this concept that consciousness is the symptom of the presence of your soul. Just think that's really cool. So it says in the Gita that consciousness is immutable, immovable, and eternal. Does this sound like the definition that we just heard from Mr. Fillmore about the Father or God? So I'd like to read from the Gita chapter 2 verse 17. Yet there is something that dwells within the body, it says, that is real, the Atman, which is existence itself, awareness, pure consciousness. Get to know this reality. It pervades the entire cosmos and is unchanging and indestructible. No power can affect it. No one can change the changeless. This Atman is like the sky or space. Clouds appear in the sky, but their presence does not cause the sky to grow apart to make room for them. In the same manner, the Atman, which is the true self within you, remains ever itself. Things in the material universe come and go, appear and disappear, but the Atman never changes. The Atman, your true self, which is consciousness, is eternal. So the Gita says that consciousness is a divine experience. And when situated in consciousness, we become freed from ignorance and abide in knowledge and transcendental joy. That just to me brings such peace to my soul to know that within me is this eternal consciousness which is above the fluctuations of life, the ups and downs, and that in this space of consciousness I abide in knowledge and transcendental joy. In fact, this idea of God consciousness in Sanskrit is Satchitananda, which is Sat Chit Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. Satchitananda. So Mr. Fillmore and the ancient yogis taught that the world is made up of consciousness. This is so important to understand because there's really no limit to what we can do if we begin with the right state of mind. Remember, Mr. Fillmore was sitting there every day at the same time for an hour trying to commune, even though he was not enthusiastic about it and really was putting it to the test. But he discovered that he could contact headquarters through the silence, through his inner self, through that higher consciousness. So he taught that the one who first conquers the mind really conquers their world. So you conquer your world by conquering your mind first. Just like the Atman, which is your true self or your soul, is an individuation of the Brahman or God, the source. You are the divine idea that originates in divine mind. Therefore you are seeded from the source. Therefore you are divine. And abiding in this knowing allows the devotee to experience the Father's love as a state of oneness with the divine. So I'm going to go back to my big chair and I'm going to read from the essential Charles Fillmore, a collection of writings of a Missouri mystic. It reads, "The dictionary definitions of mind and spirit are nearly identical. If spirit and mind are synonymous, we readily perceive that there is no great mystery about spiritual things, that we are not far removed from our daily thoughts and experiences. You are a temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells in you. Simply means that God dwells in us as our mind dwells in our body. Thus we see that God creates and moves creation through the power of mind. The vehicles of mind are thoughts, and it is through our mind and in thought action that we shall find God and do His will." Essentially what the Gita is saying. So let's talk about this Father's love. And how do we contact headquarters? We're going to look at the scripture from the Daily Word, which was John chapter 15, verse 9. Now remember that John is the mystical gospel, whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the story about Jesus. The Gospel of John tells the story about the Christ, and Jesus was the example of this higher consciousness embodied through him that we all have the same potential to experience. So to further understand this teaching in John, we're going to turn to Paramahansa Yogananda's The Second Coming of Christ, the resurrection of the Christ within you, in which he explains these gospel teachings from the consciousness of a mystic and a yogi. It reads, "If your consciousness is in tune with my Christ consciousness and the emanations of cosmic vibration coming from me, you will be able to accomplish whatever you wish due to your will working through the cosmic intelligence and cosmic vibratory energy, which is the creative word of God. Any devotee of any era who is in tune with the Christ consciousness materializes the glory and wisdom of the cosmic consciousness of the Father, hidden in and beyond all creation. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." That is what this means. Communing with the divine source. Abide in my love. Allow that wisdom, the illumination through your consciousness to be received. So again, let us give thanks for the Father and all expressions of fatherly love. So unity is a practical spiritual community. We believe in putting these principles into action. And so how do we do this? How do we commune with the Father, divine mind, and experience the Father's love? Well, we're going to turn to Charles Fillmore, who was an expert, as he demonstrated earlier, to see what he said about it. Take a truth statement and repeat it over and over. It does not matter that at first you do not believe it to be true. If you will persistently affirm truth, even though you do not believe it at first, you will find that your prayers have power. Faith is like a mustard seed, and it will grow Pray, pray, and keep praying. Affirm and yet affirm once more. Your persistent prayers will succeed. So, in conclusion, the Father Principle is the divine masculine aspect of Source, divine mind, your higher consciousness, and you are the divine idea. You are seeded from the Source. We experience the Father's love by finding union with God, by uplifting our consciousness to the Christ mind, as Yogananda said. And like Mr. Fillmore said, pray and keep affirming, and do it on a regular basis. For the thing is that it works. When you put it to practice, it does change your life. And so I encourage you to test these principles for yourself and find your truth in them. So let us give thanks for all fathers, for the Father of Unity, for the Father Principle, Divine Mind, for our earthly fathers, all expression of fatherly love. And let us give thanks for the knowing of how to commune with the Divine Father's love. This God consciousness, which all of the great wisdom teachers have taught us about, which might be called the Father's love as we are today, referring to it, the divine idea that you are the truth within you. This state of consciousness is Satchitananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. And namaste. So let's have an experience of this state of consciousness, this communion with the Source. I invite you to gently close your eyes and quiet your mind. Allow your body to relax. Bring yourself fully into this present moment. For you can only feel the presence when you are present. Take a deep breath in and let go as you exhale slowly. Feel totally loved and fully supported. Surrender all your concerns to a higher power, the Source within you, knowing that you are far greater than your concerns. Give yourself permission to surrender fully and let go. Our Father, who art in heaven, I am now conscious of the infinite and eternal presence in whom I live, and by which I think and create. This great divine energy is flowing in me, and when I realize the truth, the veil is lifted, and the inherent power within me shines forth. A vast well of supply springs up, bringing eternal life. Hallowed be thy name. This presence in me is whole and complete. It is the activity of health that heals, of intelligence that inspires, of substance that prospers, and of love that harmonizes. I am a complete expression of the allness of spirit. There is within me all the wisdom of the universe, all creativity, all that humankind knows and will ever know. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. I am God's glorious possibility. I let this perfect idea of me unfold within me and through me. Wherever I am, God is. All of God, the whole of God, present in all time and space. Give us this day our daily bread. I am the presence of God expressing as me. Divine substance is everywhere present, pervading all things and inspiring to action. I am one with the all-sufficient divine substance of the opulent universe. I am the focus of the affluence of the heavens and the earth. I feel the creative process of the universe streaming and pouring into me from all sides while I do my work. And I claim my divine inheritance as I perpetually manifest abundant supply. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. The presence in me is my potential for dissolving all conflict. This presence is love, understanding, wisdom, and illumination. It releases me as I loose and let go of all my limited thoughts about myself and others. It allows me to move into a state of forgiveness. And when I realize the allness of the Source, I walk easily through all the ways and all the challenges. Leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. The presence in me is my light and my deliverance. There is no darkness in the light, and there can be no darkness in me when I am established in spiritual unity with the presence within me. In this realization of being in the allness, there is no fear. I I simply act when I am prompted to from within. I cannot make a mistake because I am in the guiding light, which is a well of wisdom and guidance. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. In all that I seek to do and have, I realize that in the presence is my power to think, the thought of aspirations, my will to commence, the strength to keep on, the power to achieve, the courage of my conviction, and the glory of my accomplishments. This is the truth, and it is now done. Let it be so, and so it is. Just allowing your awareness to come back into your body, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity to commune with the divine and experience the Father's love. And we will close with the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds me. I am the light. The love of God enfolds me. I am the love. The power of God protects me. I am the power. The presence of God watches over me. I am the presence. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well. The Lord watches between me and thee, while we are absent one from the other, and helps us to know that we are one in spirit. And so it is. Blessed be. Namaste. Amen.